Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Harriet Applegate, and I'm on the Board of Trustees of the City Club, and I'm very pleased to be making this introduction. The passage of Senate Bill 5 will affect every Ohioan in a significant way. Most people don't realize this, and that is why today's presentation is so very important. Collective bargaining, and unions for that matter, are not things that the general population, even the informed general population, have had to think much about since the early 80s in Ohio when we won collective bargaining for public employees. Collective bargaining brings much to Ohio. It is the appropriate tool for labor management relations in a democracy. It amounts to discussion and resolution, the tools used in civil society for human interaction. Just as when individuals disagree, we all agree that they should sit down, discuss, and then resolve the problem, rather than have one crush the other and completely dominate. Just as we know that nothing good comes out of a relationship of complete dominance when it comes to individuals, so we can understand and predict what will happen if management were to completely dominate labor. While collective bargaining may have no place in an authoritarian society or a dictatorship, it is indispensable to democracy. Unions make critical contributions to civil society as well and help democracy function. Unions raise wages for everyone, not just their own members. Unions lift people out of poverty. They brought us the middle class, and they grow the middle class wherever they exist. Unions are equalizers. They not only reduce the wage gap between the highest and lowest wage earners, but they disproportionately help those who need it the most by raising wages for those in low wage categories by about 30% on average, and high wage categories by about 10%. Today, Seth Rosen, Vice President of the Communications Workers of America District 4, is going to talk more specifically about Senate Bill 5 and what can be done about it. Seth has spent his entire career fighting for workers' rights. As a new hire at AT&T, he was instrumental in organizing Jobs with Justice. He served his home Local 4309 for many years and fought many battles, even battling within against the legendary Marty Hughes. A scrappy guy like this in the labor movement has one perfect niche: organizing, the lifeblood of the labor movement. And that is what Seth eventually became, an organizer for the International Union, where he worked in 5 states. The life of a union organizer is challenging in every way, not the least of which is that you work very closely with a group of people for so long, and when the campaign is over, you leave. Fortunately for the members, Seth didn't leave. He ascended to District Vice President, which is an international vice president, and now he gets to interact with all those he organized over the years. He now has responsibility for coordination of bargaining, organizing, and political action for the 75,000 CWA members in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. All of those which are the most embattled states in the entire nation right now with regard to this same issue. He is an extremely busy person these days, but he takes whatever time is necessary to deal with the attack on labor in our own state. It is my honor and great privilege to be able to introduce to you my brother and friend, Seth Rosen.
Thank you, Harriet. That was very, very kind, and thanks to the City Club. It is such a great honor and privilege to be invited to speak here at the City Club, and I really appreciate the opportunity. The City Club is also known as the citadel of free speech. Free speech is such a critical function in our democracy in America. I'm particularly glad to be here then in a moment when another critical part of our democracy, the right to organize and bargain, is under attack. You know, for as long as my family has been in this country, we've been a part of the fight to build democratic institutions that give workers a voice. My 2 grandfathers, Nathan Fisher and Morris Rosen, came to America as immigrants at the end of the 19th century and found sweatshop jobs in the New York garment district. Nathan was a sewing machine operator. Morris was a fur worker. They were there when their unions first organized. They weren't leaders or shop stewards, but always told me how their unions lifted them out of poverty, created a safer work environment, and provided them with dignity and a voice at work. My mother was a school teacher in the early days of public employee collective bargaining, and her union helped upgrade the standards of her profession. When I went to work for the telephone company as a customer service rep, I came in already appreciating the value of a union job, not just in helping workers maintain a middle-class standard of living, but equally, perhaps even more importantly, unions give workers a voice to create a just and fair workplace. It's interesting and revealing then that SB 5, the bill that the Ohio Senate just passed on Wednesday, doesn't simply restrict or eliminate public sector unions' ability to bargain on economic issues, but totally eliminates the ability of workers to utilize their unions to bargain for justice at work. A few quick examples. Under SB 5, police will be banned from asking for bulletproof vests to protect themselves. Bus drivers would not be allowed to speak out for the need to replace worn tires, frayed windshield wipers, or squeaky brakes. So I'm here today, hopefully, to start a conversation about how we can have good jobs and strong communities in Ohio. I hope that we'll have a discussion about how various issues in the news today, labor rights, the state budget crisis, and overall economic issues are interrelated. Out of understanding how we got to this moment, we can start to think about solutions that could unite Ohioans in a common endeavor to reverse the declines in our state. In fact, for most of our 200-year history, Ohio and America grew together. Ohio was a place that people would move to in order to find good jobs and strong communities. A strong middle class with good union jobs supported the kinds of services that make a strong community: fire, police, schools, hospitals, libraries, parks, and much more. In turn, these strong communities provided a marketplace where people bought the goods and services, which then led to good jobs. During much of this time, the economy was growing, and the income of workers grew at the same time. In the 3 decades that followed the Second World War, productivity and median family income grew together, each at about 104%. Between 1948 and 1979, income distribution in America remained stable as a rising tide lifted all boats. During this period, Ohio and the nation embraced policies that were designed to create a middle class. We established a minimum wage. We created Social Security, turning retirement from the most likely time in life to be poor to the least likely. We encouraged unionization as a policy of our country. We invested heavily in education, growing high school and college completion rates from 25% and 5% in 1940 to 83% and 21% in 2000. We established a safety net, and we created and regulated financial products that led to growing homeownership and wealth building. We created the world's first middle class, and the good jobs and strong communities of Ohio were at the center of it, with people from all over the country and the world moving to Ohio. So what happened? The economy changed, particularly the manufacturing economy. Unions were attacked, wages stagnated, jobs moved outside the U.S., and families struggled. On top of these overall economic trends, politicians accelerated the problem. Elected officials led by the Taft administration in Ohio and the Bush administration nationally told us that cutting taxes, privatizing services, reducing unionization levels, reducing regulation of financial products and industry, and encouraging more international trade in manufactured goods would help bring back good jobs and strong communities. It didn't work. In fact, it led to lower wages, fewer jobs, lower quality jobs, more debt, and fewer resources to support the public structures, services, and institutions that build strong communities. It did help enrich a lot of people, though, people at the top. While productivity increased around the same amount during this period as it had in the previous period, but 105%, average family income, instead of growing in tandem with productivity, 105%, grew only 31%. Between 2000 and 2005, the period of the Bush and Taft administrations, median income actually declined by 2.3% during a time that productivity increased 16.6%. Unlike in the previous 30 years, when incomes grew together with growth, between 1979 and 2000, the richest 10% accounted for 91% of the average income growth. The top 1% alone captured 37% of the growth in the economy. The top 1%, 37% of the growth. This giant pool of money, as I heard it called on NPR once, in the hands of a few, did what always happens throughout human history to giant pools of money in the hands of a few. It went looking for a casino. From tulips in Holland to the bubble described by Charles Dickens in the opening to Nicholas Nickleby to the 2008 financial crisis, it found a speculative vehicle to gamble on. This Wall Street-led financial crisis, on top of the longer-term crisis of stagnating income, tore a gaping hole in the American economy. At the current rate of job growth, it will take 17 years to return America to full employment. The human toll on our unemployed and underemployed citizens is incalculable, not just in simple economic terms, but also in personal and psychological costs. It has been well documented that unemployment increases rates of depression, suicide, domestic violence, substance abuse, and child abuse. For young people whose unemployment rate in 2010 was 19.6%, the highest in over 60 years, the consequences may be long-lasting. Peter Coy, writing in Bloomberg Businessweek, wrote, quote, "For people just starting their careers, the damage may be deep and long-lasting, potentially creating a kind of lost generation. Studies suggest that an extended period of youthful joblessness can significantly depress lifetime income as people get stuck in jobs that are beneath their capabilities or come to be seen by employers as damaged goods," unquote. What kind of goods and services will this lost generation be able to buy? What kind of communities will they be able to support? You know, when I was 22 years old and looking for a job in 1979, it was the beginning of the changes in the economy, and it was a little tough to find work. However, I was ultimately able to find a job as a service rep at the phone company, which provided me with a family wage. It was a union job. I got married, I had 2 kids, I bought a house, I contributed to a strong community in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, based on the union wages and benefits that I earned. My kids, now 25 and 29, and many of their friends don't have these same opportunities that I've had. However, these are not the only consequences of this current economic crisis, because it's this very hole in the economy that is the primary cause of the state budget crisis in Ohio, Wisconsin, and elsewhere. People without jobs don't pay taxes. People without good jobs can't contribute much either. On top of that, we have reduced taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations in states like Ohio. So, for example, the 2005 tax cuts in Ohio have led to the loss of $2 billion with a B dollars a year in revenue, according to the Ohio Department of Taxation. That's $4 billion over this biennial budget. Or in other words, fully 50% of the $8 billion hole in the budget that people have heard talked about was the result of these tax cuts. It's roughly the equivalent, for those of you who want to think about the tax on public employees, it's roughly the equivalent to the cost of firing around 2/3 of all public workers that work for the state of Ohio, $2 billion. So what are the proposals that are currently on the table to deal with this? In Governor Kasich's inaugural address, he talked about not being selfish. I agree with that, totally agree with that. In times of crisis throughout our history, Americans have always believed in shared sacrifice. Most famously, during the 2 world wars, Americans united and all sacrificed for the common good of the nation. However, those are not the kind of policies that are being introduced by the Kasich administration. Instead of a balanced approach on the budget crisis, like more than 30 other states have done, Kasich has articulated an ideologically motivated, radical, cuts-only approach. Instead of working to retain good jobs, he seeks to eliminate them, both by destroying public sector collective bargaining and weakening private sector labor rights. It is not shared sacrifice to cut workers' pay, jobs, benefits, cut public services and investment while taking any other ideas off the table. State workers, for example, have already made $200 million in concessions in their current contracts. That's just for the state. Mostly in the form of reduced wages from 10 unpaid furlough days that took effect over the course of the year. Getting $200 million in sacrifice from workers and then proposing to give away $135 million of it to wealthy individuals by eliminating the estate tax on the richest Ohioans is not exactly what I would call shared sacrifice. You know, one of the justifications for this unshared sacrifice, I guess we can call it, is that public workers are somehow a new privileged class that enjoys a lifestyle and a way of life that other workers don't, particularly in the private sector, can't ever hope to enjoy. And this viewpoint has been articulated by many governors, including New Jersey's Chris Christie, who recently said, quote, "In Wisconsin and Ohio, they have decided there can no longer be two classes of citizens, one that receives rich health and pension benefits and all the rest who will have to pay for them." Or Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, for doing a recent speech in Ohio called public unions, quote, "the privileged elite," unquote. Well, Mitch, there's a privileged elite, all right. But it ain't the person plowing snow, diving into our flooded rivers, teaching our kids to read, or running into burning buildings. Who are they? Who are these privileged elite? They're people like top hedge fund manager John Paulson, who in 2010, after our tax dollars bailed out Wall Street, earns $2.4 million an hour. $2.4 million an hour. But wait, there's more. And because of a tax loophole that has still not been closed, he pays taxes at a 15% rate, far below the rate of taxation paid by a firefighter, nurse, or teacher here in Ohio. In fact, the top 25 hedge fund managers made $25 billion last year. That is the equivalent to the salaries of 658,000 school teachers who teach 13 million students. Yet these governors are calling teachers a privileged elite. Personally, I think 658,000 teachers bring a lot more value to our country than 25 hedge fund managers. According to the current issue of The Atlantic, quote, none other than former five-term Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, preeminent defender of the free market, stated that the U.S. has fundamentally two separate types of economy, with high-income individuals, banks, and major corporations experiencing a significant recovery, and the rest of the economy, including small business and a significant amount of the labor force, stuck and still struggling. Demonizing public workers and having a radical budget-cutting agenda at a time when income inequality in America is accelerating is not my idea of shared sacrifice. Yet Governor Kasich in his inaugural address said, presumably about public employees, quote, "The last gasp of air in the coal mine. I want mine. And they forget we're all in this together. Don't be selfish," unquote. It was an interesting choice of a metaphor for Governor Kasich. Coal mine collapses, like the recent economic crisis, are often talked about like they are natural disasters. In fact, both the recent mine collapses, either in West Virginia or in Chile, and the 2008 economic meltdown are unnatural disasters, a direct result of greed by small numbers of mine operators, hedge fund managers, and the true members of the privileged class. So what should we do? We need good jobs and strong communities to return to Ohio and to return us to being the kind of state that people move to. We need to address the state budget crisis by dialogue, compromise, creativity, and shared sacrifice. A coalition of community, faith, and labor groups called One Ohio Now has been encouraging an open dialogue on all budget options, not just cuts. We will need to make cuts. But if we truly believe in shared sacrifice to get ourselves out of this mess, we should also look at ideas like restoring the state tax rates on incomes over $200,000, as they were during the Voinovich administration. Slashing special interest tax breaks, such as there's a cap on sales tax paid by wealthy buyers of timeshares in jet aircraft. Can't make this stuff up. Or reinstating a state corporate income tax, which was just phased out, doing little, obviously, for Ohio's economy, and leaving us as one of only 6 states in the country that does not tax corporate profits. We need to work together, business, government, and labor, to put our unemployed and underemployed back to work in good jobs so that they can support middle-class communities. We need to create millions of sustainable jobs across the country, including in Ohio. We cannot afford to wait 17 years to return our nation or our state to full employment. We need investment in infrastructure, alternative energy, and broadband, which would make high-speed internet affordable and available to a wide number of Americans. State government has to unite our communities, our businesses, and unions to work together to grow and retain good jobs. Programs like the Recovery Act-funded workforce development have supported training programs in healthcare, weatherization, smart grid maintenance and implementation. More than 25,000 Ohio jobs have been created or retained with Recovery Act funds. Another example of cooperation would be the work my union, the Communication Workers of America, did with AT&T and the Strickland administration to bring new telecom investment to Ohio, creating hundreds of new jobs in both broadband and wireless services. Ohio faces a wide range of problems that affect our jobs, communities, schools, health, and happiness. We can't look at these issues separately and expect everyone to work together. My union has joined with some other unions, community, faith, civil rights, and other groups to form a broad coalition, Stand Up Ohio for Good Jobs and Strong Communities, which aims to make those links and help build a positive future for all of us. So what can people in the audience or people listening do? I have 3 simple suggestions. Number 1, join with over 115,000 other Ohioans and sign up as a fan on our Facebook page, Stand Up for Ohio, where you'll be kept apprised of the latest news and events. It has also been a great place for dialogue. Republicans, Democrats, independents, Tea Party activists, union members, community activists are all discussing their views of the events of the day, and everyone is welcome to join and participate. Number 2, if you are so inclined, call 1-888-218-5931 and tell your state representative that you want good jobs and strong communities. That means a balanced approach to the budget crisis and retaining good union jobs, not destroying them, including no on SB 5. 1-888-218-5931. You plug in your zip code and you got connected to your state representative. Number 3, attend one of the Stand Up for Good Jobs and Strong Communities events that will be happening all around the state on March 15th. A full list will be on the Facebook page and will also be listed on the website www.protectohiofamilies.com. But I can tell you that events in the Cleveland area include Strongsville, Oberlin, and Ashtabula. You know, there are many great groups and organizations doing a lot of things to respond to our current crisis, and we really do need many voices. However, the Kasich administration seems to have a strategy of divide and conquer. Our coalition has an answer for that. Unite together and stand up, Ohio, for good jobs and strong communities. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Seth Rosen, District Vice President for the Communications Workers of America, AFL-CIO District 4. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Marketing and Membership Manager Heather Sikora and Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Seth, thank you very much for your presentation. Just recently, the faculty at Cuyahoga Community College were summoned to a presentation by an attorney that was flown in from North Carolina. The gist of the presentation was that if we spoke publicly about any issues affecting our jobs, even issues that had a public nature, that we could be terminated. Would you please speak about how SB 5 and the resultant relaxing of guarantees and protections, union protections, might stifle public discourse and free speech, even affecting issues as important as higher education in this community.
Great. Sure. So there is, when employees, whether they're faculty, firefighters, teachers, whoever they are, have rules, arbitrary and unfair rules imposed on them in the public or private sector, they, right now at this moment, have recourse. And the recourse is to organize a union. And organize a union to bargain collectively to protect their rights on the job, to assure that they have rights to free speech. I mean, I remember really well being a young service rep at the phone company, and there was a state ballot issue, and the AT&T brought in some executive from downtown to come take everybody off the job and tell us why it was such a bad thing, and we should all vote no on it, which I disagreed with. And I stood up and argued with him. And some people I work with said, you know, can't they fire you for that? And had I not had a union, the answer would have been yes, right? People don't have free speech rights in the workplace. So one of the things that unions do for faculty, for teachers, for all employees in the public and private sector is give people some recourse when their rights are taken away, when they attempt to muzzle the rights for them to speak out on issues, not just issues that concern them, but issues that affect, you know, all of them. And so that's, again, people that are concerned, you may not be in a union, but if you're concerned about free speech, if you're concerned about democratic rights, you know, you can call your state representatives in Ohio and make your voice heard.
Thank you, Mr. Rosen. What is your response to the concern that an actual strike by public workers, not the threat of a strike, but actual work stoppage, is damaging and dangerous to the community?
Okay. Thanks. That's a really good question, because it's one of the things that's done in this bill. So two answers. One answer is we had more strikes among public employees in Ohio before 1983, in the 30 years before 1983, or 25 years, when there was no collective bargaining law, than we would, and strikes were illegal, than we did in the following 25 years. So in fact, the result of collective bargaining has been to create a process that's an effective and fair process that has resulted in fewer strikes. You know, strikes are, in fact, you know, an inconvenience to the public when they happen, and certainly are something that are not fun for the people who are on strike. You lose pay, it's very stressful and whatever. It's certainly something that we should, I think everyone would agree, we want to minimize in our society in either the public or the private sector. The question is, do we want to make them illegal, right? Because if they're illegal, then employers can simply say, I'm going to dictate your terms and conditions of employment. I'm going to dictate the rules of this negotiation. There is no recourse. Under the proposed SB 5, the only recourse from a public sector employer is that the legislative body, which is in fact the same as the employer, gets to make decisions and resolve disputes. That's not a real process of dispute resolution. So they have barred strikes in Ohio for police and fire, but they have replaced it with a meaningful dispute resolution process, a process of binding arbitration that gives workers a fair chance. If, you know, they were serious about eliminating strikes and wanted to have fair dispute resolution, they'd be proposing that for everyone. They're not. They're proposing to take away the right to strike and replace it with nothing. And so that's not a fair and balanced, as the governor said in Cleveland yesterday, a bill.
Seth, what is our strategy to fight against Senate Bill 5, as not only unions, but everybody else, because it's definitely directed toward the middle class? And I guess I want to know what's being planned to fight against this.
Great question. So obviously the bill now goes to the House. People may have heard Speaker Batchelder this morning on public radio announcing that he plans to hold hearings and have some deliberation on it, which I think is a really good thing, and that there'll be an opportunity for the public to weigh in, and we definitely plan to have opportunities for the public to weigh in. I'm sure there'll be some small event happening around the State of the State in Columbus. And then on March 15th, as I mentioned before, there is going to be events across Ohio, in community after community, in places like Strongsville, in places like Ashtabula, in places like Oberlin, Vandalia, Cambridge, Athens, all across the state, There will be events that will be organized in those communities about SB 5, about the budget, tying these things together under the banner of good jobs in strong communities and standing up. It may or may not pass the House. I mean, there's a large Republican majority in the House, but this is not not only is this not a bipartisan bill, SB 5, it's not even a partisan bill. They can't even get other Republicans to vote for it. So there's a 23-10 majority in the Senate, and yet the vote was 17-16. This is a fringe, radical attack on collective bargaining that they can't even unite Republicans around. So, the fight's not over in the House. It's a challenge, but we're going to be involved in doing that, and people should be involved in calling their state reps. In the event that we'd be unsuccessful, and in the event we're unsuccessful stopping the governor from signing it, we have a great free speech democratic institution in Ohio, which I like to call the citizen veto, that when a bill is passed and the citizens don't like it, we can go out, we can get signatures, we can put that on the ballot, and we can vote whether that in fact becomes law or not. And so we have the ability to do that. That is the likely course of action that we do. I could say we're very fortunate in Ohio. In Wisconsin, or Indiana, they don't have that kind of a provision. So one of the reasons why you see legislators in Wisconsin and Indiana kind of leaving and trying to create the climate for compromise is because they don't have that right to, if something passes, then force it to be put on the ballot. So in the event the fight is in the House, we need to keep our focus there. We're going to have 2 or 3 weeks to do that. But in the event it passes and the governor signs it, we'll have 90 days to get 260 valid signatures, which means collecting 500 or 600,000 in 40 counties in Ohio. There's people in this room who have done this before. It's definitely doable. They're laughing right now. They're ready to help us do it again. And I'm not only confident that we can put it on the ballot, I'm very confident that when it puts on the ballot, an overwhelming majority of Ohioans will say, we reject this attack on democratic rights of working people.
Can you stand? Sure. Go ahead.
My question is, would you say a bit more about March 15th and why it's important for unions and community to turn out for that event?
Great, thank you. So March 15th is a day of action across the state, sponsored by this coalition, Stand Up Ohio for Good Jobs and Strong Communities. It's a coalition not just of labor, and it's not just about labor issues. And the kind of logic of it, the reason for it is fairly simple. There are a whole series of attacks on our jobs, on our communities. Those things are connected. You cannot have strong communities without good jobs underpinning them. You can't have good jobs without strong communities where people live and they create a marketplace for goods and services. To get a marketplace of demand for things that are made in their communities. Wouldn't it be nice to see made in Ohio on things again, like we used to see in this state, or made in Wisconsin or whatever? That's the kind of thing that would be helpful. And so these fights are all connected. The fights for labor rights, the fights on the budget and on our budget priorities, the fights for a decent place for clean water that comes out of the sink, the fights for police protection and safety, all of these things are connected. They're not separate fights. They're not separate issues. March 15th is a day to unite around all of these fights. And that's why it's so really important. It's really important that not just labor union members, not just people who are part of human services organizations or libraries or schools that are affected by budget cuts, but every citizen that cares about having good jobs and having strong communities comes out. It's important that it not just be in Columbus. People, ask me sometimes, you've been to Wisconsin, you've seen that. It's very exciting. It's very inspiring. Why aren't we having more things like that in Ohio? And, obviously there's a lot of reasons for it, but one of the reasons is ultimately it is about building a majority that's united behind good jobs and strong communities. Not just about having demonstrations of 100,000 or 200,000, but building a majority of 2 or 3 million citizens in Ohio who want to stand together on a broad agenda. And you don't do that by having rallies. Rallies are good and they're inspiring, and we'll have plenty of them. You do that by building in communities, community by community. And so March 15th is a day for folks in these communities. If you are, in a community that's not already having an event around Northeast Ohio, that's Strongsville, Oberlin, or Ashtabula, but there's things around the state of Ohio. If there's not an event in your community and you want to have one, you can get in touch with the Good Jobs and Strong Communities Coalition through that Facebook page, Stand Up Ohio. You can search it on Facebook, or the website Protect Ohio Families. Either of those things are good ways to get in touch, and if you'd like to see an event in your community, you can do that.
Seth, I've been hearing from a lot of my neighbors who are parents of public school students and so forth. What is this bill actually goes through? What's it going to mean to, say, the contracts that have been hammered out over years between our teachers and the school boards and communities all over the state? I mean, what is going to be the immediate impact? And if it goes to, if it passes but there's a referendum, what happens in the interim? What can people expect?
Right. Great question. So if a bill passes and is signed into law, there's a period of time to come up with a small number of signatures that gets you to the ballot language states. I could talk for an hour on the arcane details of it if I actually knew them, but you're going to get my understanding of it, which is very simplified. So there's a small group that gets 1,000 signatures on the notion that there wants to be one. They then get ballot language approved and have the balance of the 90 days that are left from the time that was signed to gather the 261,000 or whatever it is ballot signatures. Once that first step is done, implementation of everything is put on hold. And so if they don't get the signatures, it's then implemented. If the initiative does get the signatures, it continues to be on hold until the ballot initiative happens. When the ballot initiative happens depends on when the 90-day clock is. So this decision to kind of let this string out a little bit is an interesting one that you could speculate as easily as I can or anyone in the audience can. Because here's the time clock. If the bill is signed before April 6th, I think it's on or before April 6th, the time clock would put it such that the thing would go to the ballot in November of 2011, this year. If it's after April 6th, it would be November 2012. So there's all kinds of strategic calculus that on both sides that go into that, but obviously the Republican leadership in the House and Senate and the governor really control when this thing passes, if it's going to pass. If they can get it passed, they control the time. So we'll see. And obviously once it's implemented, the second part of the question is what happens to people once it's implemented? And the answer is total chaos. I mean, there'll be all kinds of legal challenges. There'll be contracts in place that are they or are they not in effect will be an interesting legal question. Does, the libertarian folks and some of our friends in the Tea Party have been very, very, very vocal about saying that we don't want the government to have the ability to abrogate contracts by the stroke of a pen, right? Some crazy left-wing socialist government could do that to private businesses. So we're not in favor of the government having the right to abrogate contracts. So we certainly have a way to unify with folks on that issue. That would be our hope. But there'll be some, and it may differ community by community. I mean, you raised about school teachers. So community A may honor their contract. The community next door, community B, may not. So it could be quite a lot of chaos. Not what Ohio needs at this critical moment in our history.
Hi. Seth, what's our strategy if the governor goes through with his threats to start laying off public sector workers now?
So obviously, the biggest threat that's happening for that is in Wisconsin, where they're trying to create pressure to put to get Democratic senators that have left the state to return. He's put a warrant out for their arrest too, I guess. I think the strategy is to try to convince the majority of people there, and I think it would be true anywhere, that we don't, these are difficult issues. You have laws that were in place in the case of Wisconsin for 60 years. What's the rush to judgment here? Why don't we have the time to sit down and try to work out some compromises? It is this refusal to work out compromises, this bullying tactics of saying my way or the highway. Right? In Wisconsin, the union says, you know what, you can have all the economic concessions. I kind of did a double take when I heard that, but they just jumped right out there and said, all the economic concessions you want, you have. Don't take away our rights. And the governor said, nah, that's not good enough. I want to take away your rights too. And I won't discuss them, and I'm going to threaten and bully you and threaten to lay people off. So I think in Wisconsin, we're out in communities building the same kind of thing I talked about a minute ago about March 15th in Ohio, trying to build community support. They don't have the ability to put it on the ballot, unfortunately. They do have something we don't have, which is the ability to recall people. So there may be some recall petitions against some members of the Wisconsin Senate that are going to be going around as part of that thing, and that's, I think, part of the strategy there. In Ohio, it's very frustrating because, we represent, CWA represents 7,000 public workers, mostly at higher ed, but in some local government. And I know the other unions in Ohio that represent public workers have worked very hard over the past it's been a long, tough time in Ohio, right? I don't need to tell anyone in this room or listening that this crisis didn't start yesterday. It's been trouble for a long time. We have worked very closely with the management that we deal with to try to solve problems. We've reduced, health care benefits and tried to help make reasonable health care solutions in every round of negotiations. As I said, the state workers gave up 10 furlough days, free days. It's the equivalent of $200 million. So unions have been trying to do this, and all of that was to avoid layoffs. All of that was to keep people working. Because the last thing we need in Ohio is more unemployed people. We got plenty of them. We don't need a single more unemployed person. So if Governor Kasich or Scott Walker or anybody else is thinking about as some strategic bullying maneuver to start laying people off, I would ask them to think about Ohio, to think about what's in the best interest of the state. We do not need one more unemployed worker. That's the last thing we need, no matter what your viewpoint is on any of these issues.
Seth, the issue is really something that's governed by state law, and it affects state and municipal and school district employees, but it happens in all of these states right now at the same time: Wisconsin, Illinois, New Jersey, Florida, as well as Ohio. Why do you think all of a sudden in 2011 there's this attack on public employees, state and municipal and local employees, in all of these various states, not only in Ohio? Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess one possibility might be coincidence. I suppose that's possible. Another more likely possibility is it's a coordinated effort. There's a public policy, national public policy organization called, and I don't remember what it stands for, ALEC, A-L-E-C, which is a far extreme right-wing radical think tank that comes up with government public policy at the state and local level, focuses on the state and local level. It's funded by some large wealthy people, the Koch brothers, among them. Those are the most famous, but they're not the only ones. I think Sam Walton is part of it as well, and some other folks that they have for a long time had an agenda about destroying the rights of public workers to organize. Public workers organizing is not something that everyone enjoys in America. America has, and this is part of what makes it so complicated. And in the interest of not making this a 16-hour talk, I decided not to try to explain this. But I'm going to just mention that there's 50 different versions of public sector collective bargaining in America, from zero in a place like Mississippi to more rights in places like California or New York or Wisconsin or Ohio. And so every state is different and unique, and the attacks are different and unique, and the details do matter. But overall, there is a general attempt across the industrial Midwest to get rid of public employee collective bargaining. And the reason for that is most likely that there is a political agenda. This is kind of political payback against public workers and their unions that, for the most part, did not support the folks that are running these states, the governors, that. Now, I'll speak for my union. We are not a partisan organization. We're not part of any political party. We endorse Republicans. We endorse Democrats. We endorse anyone who supports the agenda of supporting good jobs and strong communities that our members agree with. It happens that those are disproportionately Democrats. But it's not iron law. When Republicans are there with us on issues like fair trade, on issues like the right to organize, we've supported them as well, and we'll continue to do so. But there's a lot of Republicans who aren't there on those issues, and they're running these states, and so I think there's a large component to this. It's an attempt in battleground states to disenfranchise, to silence and muzzle the voice of unions, to silence and muzzle the voice of public sector unions, of private sector unions, of unions that have done an amazing job of educating their members and turning them out to vote. And they don't want that. They don't want folks to turn out to vote. They don't want people that are educated with the fact that there's people, hedge fund managers on Wall Street, making $2.4 million an hour when we're all told, about layoffs and cuts and whatever. They don't want people doing that, and I think there's a political agenda that's behind a whole lot of this.
Mr. Rosen, in an effort to follow this topic from a distance, one of the things that seems to come out of the mist is a willingness on the part of those who are pushing for change in the law to allow bargaining over wages, but to resist bargaining over benefits. And part of what is explicit, I think, in your position is that the collective bargaining process is quite capable of handling bargaining over benefits, too, even though that touches on some of the really challenging issues for our whole society, health care and pensions in particular. And I would really welcome your almost philosophical comments on how well you think the collective bargaining process can address great, big, almost cosmic issues like pensions, where the payout may spread out over decades beyond the year in which you're actually getting compensation for work done. And I would welcome your thoughts on that, particularly in the public setting where you don't have the threat of bankruptcy on the part of the employer, which is part of what shapes the discussion of pension issues, let's say, in a GM context or something like that. Right. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. That's a really good question. I'll get to the philosophical thing in a minute. Let me just introduce a fact that I think gets missed here. In Ohio today, under the current law, public worker unions, including ours, we don't actually get to bargain pensions. Pensions are done legislatively by statute that create these different funds. We do get to bargain the level of contribution. There's an employee contribution. Most of the money in that pension fund comes out of the public employees' paychecks. There's some that comes from the employer as well, from the taxpayer, if you will. There is negotiation about how much gets paid in there. But the overall architecture of the plans in the public sector, we don't get to bargain that. Never have in Ohio. We do in the private sector, but not in the public sector. So, but leaving that aside, so here's the philosophical thing. I've been actually bargaining for a long time, and I bargained through, arguably the worst, most horrible bargaining period in American history for a union leader to bargain in. In both the public and the private sector. It's very difficult. And the way that we are able to resolve things amicably best is when both sides understand that a dollar is a dollar, and the employer has concerns, whether they're public or private, about the cost of things. That's what they do, right? They should. The union member has a concern about how it affects them. And if we try to keep the emotion out of it, healthcare and pensions are emotional subjects. They're very emotional subjects for people, for obvious reasons, I think. They're about old age, they're about your health, they're about whatever. And we try to look at it as a dollar, we have the best chance to resolve things. And so, what that means, for example, is when an employer, a public sector employer, pays $1 in wages, it costs them more than $1. There's other costs that get added on because it's wage costs, right? Everybody with me? If instead of paying that $1 in wage, so I'm making up a number, I don't know what the real number is. Let's say it's $1.10 or $1.20 or whatever it is. If instead of paying that $1 in wages, which costs $1.20, they instead picked up $1's worth of that employee's PERS contribution, okay, their employee contribution, that only costs $1. So from the point of view of the employer, not the employee, the employer, it's cheaper for them. It has less impact on their budget to pick up $1 of the employee's PERS contribution than to give them $1 in wages. For the point of view of the employee, it's the same thing, right? In fact, the PERS kind of thing is better. They could maybe even take 80 cents or 75 cents because it's pre-tax. Oh, thank you. PERS is the Public Employment Retirement System. It's one of the pension funds that exists in the state of Ohio. So you're in tough negotiations. The employer doesn't have money, the county, the city, the state the university, the library, whatever it is under a budget crunch. You're trying to figure out ways to be fair and resolve it. Having the flexibility to say, you know what, instead of $1 in wages, we could give you 75 cents in a PERS contribution and you'll be better off, right, is a win-win situation in some cases, for example. Same thing with healthcare in terms of healthcare premiums or healthcare costs. There's different things. So tough negotiations are able to occur successfully when both sides have tools at their disposal, have flexibility. If the state of Ohio makes some of those tools illegal, makes it illegal for a municipality, a university, a library to say, I want to make some kind of trade-off between PERS and wages, they're going to create more labor tension, they're going to create more stress, they're going to make it more difficult. So I think that if people are interested in collective bargaining as a rational way of resolving problems, they're going to be in favor of giving negotiators the flexibility. Employers can always say no. They have the ability to say no. Oftentimes, a lot of the kind of deferred compensation solutions are raised, in my experience, to the bargaining table, not by the union, but by the management. It is often the management that seeks to do these other kinds of deferred compensations. Last thing in terms of the issue of kind of pensions and the long term. There clearly needs to be conversations in the public sector about pension reform. That the architecture of the pension system, which was not done through collective bargaining, it was done through the legislature, was at a time when people lived a lot shorter and worked a lot longer. And so the math doesn't work today the way it worked when it was created. And so you either have to put more money in or change. There's limited range options, really. It's not like calculus. It's like arithmetic. So that conversation needs to happen. That's, I think, non-controversial. The controversial thing is this going to get resolved by everybody sitting at a table and mutually coming up with a solution, or is it going to get resolved by a majority in the House and Senate ramming it down people's throats, removing their own people from committees to get stuff through the way they did with Senate Bill 5? That's the question that's out there.
Seth, 2 points here. Do you think that there is a gender disequality point to this whole thing? And the second thing is that the raising of the oil and the gas prices, do you think that has anything to divert people's attention to what's happening?
Great. Thank you. 2 good questions. I think that there's a lot of evidence that unions are the major factor in reducing gender gap in terms of wages. Tons and tons of evidence of that. That where all other things being equal, if women are in unions, there's much less of a wage gap, or in many cases no wage gap at all, than if they're not. And so unions have done that in both the public and the private sector. I mean, my mother was a school teacher, and the whole raising of that profession, which was predominantly women, that were school teachers, is very much a result of public sector collective bargaining. In terms of oil prices, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I don't know that anyone's doing this, but I can tell you this, that people are really hurting in Ohio and in America. People have seen their wages stagnate for like 20, 30 years. People's wages went down on average in the last few years. So part of what is really fueling some of the folks that got elected is people, the corporations and the government have taken people's ability to organize unions in the private sector almost away completely. They're now attacking it in the public sector. If you're an average person, you see gas prices going up, you see your wages stagnating or going down. What's my hope of getting a raise? Well, my $180 tax cut from the state of Ohio. Well, at least that's something, right? And that's how they get people, sucked into this tax cutting agenda. And what people have to realize is that I'm sure that for a lot of people, the $180 was really, really helpful. And I'm sure for the wealthy top percent in Ohio, the $10,000 they got in an average instead of $180 that the rest of us got was really, really helpful. But the fact of the matter is, we need good jobs. We need to raise wages. We need to have the kind of jobs that people can afford to put gas in their car, regardless of whatever happens in Libya or around the world. We need to have the kind of jobs that people can support their communities, to have decent schools, to have decent fires. That's why we formed this coalition. Stand Up for Ohio is our Facebook page. If you want to call your state rep, you can call 1-888-218-5931 and tell your representative you want good jobs in strong communities. Thanks very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to Seth Rosen, District Vice President for the Communications Workers of America. Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.